Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week we're talking about Ted Cruz versus all of the women on The View. Is TikTok getting canceled? The chickens are coming home to roast on school lockdowns, and our favorite things from the internet this week. Let's jump in. Brad, I see in our show notes you're going to Costa Rica?
Yes, I am. I'm leaving on Saturday, and I'm going for 5 or 6 nights for a little mini family vacation, so that should be fun.
That sounds lovely. I've never been to Costa Rica, have you?
No, I haven't, but a few days will be like seeing the country and visiting the towns and stuff, and a few days we'll just be on the beach.
Oh my gosh, all right. Well, that sounds lovely. My weekend plans are a little bit more mundane, but I'm figuring out my Halloween costume right now. I haven't had an opportunity to dress up in a few years, which has made me sad because I actually taught myself to do zombie makeup. I've taught myself to do skeleton makeup. I know, I'm really good at making myself look dead. I don't know that I'm going to do that this year because we're going to be taking Logan's kids to like a fall festival, and I don't want to scare them, but I think I'm going to be Bellatrix from Harry Potter, which is a great... I love playing the villain. Back when I did like musical
Bellatrix?
theater.
I don't remember.
She's bad. She's bad. She's Helena Bonham Carter's role. She she's the one that kills Harry's godfather, Sirius Black. She has the crazy big curly hair. Well, she's a lunatic, okay?
I just
she's
barely
a murderous
remember
lunatic.
it, to be honest.
I'm a Harry Potter nerd. But anyways, that's what I'm going for. I ordered a cape. I'm looking forward to it.
Have you seen this meme of all the like fake Halloween costumes?
No.
So they it's like people keep photoshopping the Halloween costume bag and putting different things.
Oh, yes, actually I saw them do that with Nancy Pelosi. It said Insider Trader, and I shared it on my Facebook and said my Halloween costume, but then somebody one-upped it and shared it with Spike Cohen, and it said like Bazooka Jew, which I don't really know where that came from, but it's the nickname Libertarian Party has for Spike, and it was just very funny. So I want somebody to make me into a costume. I feel like
you probably don't. Probably would put something not very nice.
That's probably accurate.
All right, Hannah. So in the latest bit of television that was like a train wreck, you just can't look away. You have to watch the slow motion disaster. The one and only Republican Senator Ted Cruz went on ABC's The View to clash with all of the hosts on that very liberal talk show. And it was a true sight to behold. It was the kind of thing I knew I had to watch because just the drama, the clickbait, the tension. I'm not particularly fans of The View or of Ted Cruz, but I could not look away from this one.
But you sent it to me, and I also enjoyed watching it. I have to say, I have never sat down and watched The View. I only ever see The View in this kind of capacity where it's a shorter clip. But it's about an 8-minute clip. And I agree with you. The tea is spicy. I clicked it expecting to sort of side with the women because I think Ted Cruz is a weasel and I don't typically like him very much. But I gotta say, he actually did pretty well in this interview, all things considered. And he was fighting it from all sides. Like, not even the Republican on the panel was with him. So I think we should break it apart. Let's move through a few different segments for folks because it's about 8 minutes long. So we'll break it up. But we had a lot to say about it.
First clip we've got here is they went back all the way to 2015-16, the presidential election primary when he was running against Trump, and they basically dug up the things Trump said about his wife and said, how could you ever support someone who said these kinds of things? Here is the first clip that we've got. Take a listen.
This is what you said about him back in 2016 during the campaign. Let's take a look.
I'm going to tell you what I really think of Donald Trump. This man is a pathological liar. He doesn't know the difference between truth and lies. He lies practically every word that comes out of his mouth. The man is utterly amoral. Morality does not exist for him.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, because, you know, I'm married to a Cuban man. Mm-hmm. I frankly don't know how you get over your wife being called ugly. I don't know how you get over those kind of calumnies against your father. But you obviously have gotten over it. Today you sing a very different tune. So tell us, were you lying then or are you lying now?
Yeah, that's a loaded question there.
Mm-hmm.
Look,
I think a lot of people have the same question. It's a very different Ted Cruz that we're seeing. We are. I mean, would you not agree that that's very different Ted Cruz than today's Ted Cruz?
What I would say is this. In 2016, we had a primary where Donald Trump and I beat the living crap out of each other. I'll tell you, Heidi laughed when he said that. My father laughed. By the way, my dad didn't just kill Kennedy. He's got Jimmy Hoffa buried in the backyard. It was idiotic. And we went after each other, and at the end of the day, he won. And I had a decision to make in November of 2016. He'd been elected president. I got a responsibility to represent 30 million Texans. I could have decided my feelings are hurt, I'm going to take the ball and go home and not do my job. But if I was prepared to do that, I better be prepared to resign from my job because I have a responsibility. So what I did is I went and said, listen, we have an opportunity to make a difference for this country, and I want to roll up my sleeves and lead the fight to actually deliver on promises. We were talking a minute ago about the incredible booming economy. We saw 7 million people get off of food stamps. We saw poverty dropping. We saw African-American poverty dropping. We saw Hispanic poverty dropping. Those are real results that make a real difference, and I'm proud of that record. And why did I choose to work with him, even though I was pissed off at what he said? Because I had a job to do, and I had a responsibility.
So I actually, I'm not a Ted Cruz fan, but I thought he responded pretty well to this. I thought this was kind of very emotional from the host. They're like, but he said mean things years ago. And he kind of responded with, I had to get over it. Politics is a messy business. I do think it's real rough to support somebody who insulted your wife, but what was he supposed to do? Throw a temper tantrum for 4 years? I mean, he didn't have to endorse Trump as much as he did, but he had to get productive and work with him when he was president of the United States to enact policies, a lot of which I supported, like the tax cuts. So I thought his answer was, it's obviously an ugly moment for him, a tough one for him to answer to, but I thought his answer, all things considered, was pretty decent.
Yeah, I thought if you were just watching this interview and you know nothing about Ted Cruz, I thought he did a really good job actually showing some humor and sidestepping this and giving what would be a pretty good political answer, right? He says, I had to answer to the people that elected me. I had to work to get things done and I had to get over it. And if it's just politics is politics, he said some mean things about my wife and my father, but they thought it was funny and we moved on. The reality is that he didn't just let it slide. He became kind of a sycophant for Trump. He was basically carrying around his coattails for the next 4 years. And Ted Cruz has never gotten a single thing done in his life, right? This is the guy that will introduce a bill called Audit the Fed, and then doesn't even show up to vote on his own bill. He's a grandstander. He says whatever he needs to stay in power, and that's why I call him a weasel. He's somebody I used to like when he first got into office. I thought he was going to be a libertarian because that's what he professed for a little bit. That's the talking point he used when it was popular to use it. So much for that when it's not anymore. So I think this is your typical Ted Cruz on display, but it played well. And I have to say, I do still find it one of the funniest moments of the Trump campaign when he accused Ted Cruz's dad of being the person who killed JFK. It was just such an outrageous claim. And then to call his wife ugly, I don't know. I that's just always going to be funny to me. I'm never going to not think it is.
I agree with you, but I did think it was petty and kind of dumb that was what the View host brought up. It's really? We're going back to 2015 for your first all the things in the world going on. It just felt a little petty and a little dumb. But what was even more Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, but I was going to say, have you ever heard anybody in the media ask him to his face, the dude called your wife ugly and you just got over it and became his biggest fan? That was a funny moment for me. I've never seen that happen before.
I wonder if he has faced that question before. I don't know. But the something even pettier and much objectively worse was that protesters interrupted and tried to stop the interview. The audience apparently wasn't very happy about them even having a conversation with somebody they disagreed with. So take a listen to this little clip from Entertainment Today about what went down.
We have seen trillions and trillions of dollars spent by Joe Biden and the Democrats. Just last year, the federal government took in $4 trillion in tax revenues. The most money in history we've ever taken in.
Yeah, and Whoopi, she wasn't standing for it.
Ladies, excuse us. Let us do our job. We hear what you have to say, but you gotta go.
So I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty pathetic if you can't even handle an 8-minute conversation with someone you don't like, that you resort to interrupting and shouting down and trying to stop an event on your own show that you like. I thought this was pretty pathetic, but I also thought the hosts, kudos to them, shut it down. Yeah, and they even apologized to him for it.
Well, I like that they shut it down, but I'm also not very surprised that the audience on The View is not used to hearing contradicting views, because as much as they try to be like, it's all different mindsets coming to the table, like, it's not. They throw in like a symbolic Republican who usually gets beat up on by the other panelists or has to basically toe the Democratic kind of line, and you don't get robust conversation or debate on this show at all. It really is meant to kind of just throw red meat to the left's audience. So that's probably why I've never actually sat down and watched it. I kind of know that. But I appreciate that they shut it down, and I think it's kind of interesting they were there shouting about climate change, of all things, at Ted Cruz. Like, I just, we talked about this last week with the climate activists, but I'm just increasingly convinced they have no idea how to actually affect change on this, all pressing issue they think should get nonstop attention. It's like the things that they do just annoy people, turn them off, and don't really achieve anything. It's weird.
Yeah, they just suck. But I thought the most interesting part of this interview was, so the View hosts are really obsessed with January 6th. And you and I both think the January 6th riot was bad. We both have been very clear that Trump did not have the election stolen from him. But they're like very obsessed with this topic. And so, of course, they brought it up time and time again to Ted Cruz. But he came with receipts, and he called them out, not just for all the times that Democrats have denied elections, but all the times they've done it on The View. And he pointed out that Hillary Clinton, Stacey Abrams have both sat in these chairs on The View with no pushback and claimed that elections were stolen or illegitimate from them. Take a listen to this little back and forth that he had. I thought it was quite a good moment for Ted Cruz.
There's a lot of folks in the media that anytime... Hold on, I'm answering exactly that question. Okay. There are a lot of folks in the media that try to, anytime a Republican is in front of a TV camera, try to say the election was fair and square and legitimate. You know who y'all don't do that to? You don't do it to Hillary Clinton, who stood up and said Trump stole the election.
They didn't storm the Capitol. They didn't try to kill my former
Abrams, who said that the election was stolen. They sat here and said it was illegitimate, and you guys were fine with it. Okay, so it's illegitimate when Republicans win, but not when Democrats win.
No, here's the thing. We may not like when Republicans win, but we don't go and we don't storm. We don't try to change, but we'll go to
Did I miss an entire year of Antifa riots where cities across this country were burning and police cars were being firebombed?
I guess you did.
Your position is the left doesn't engage in violence? Really?
No, they wanted to nuke our friend Mike Pence. Like, how do we make sense of that?
You just accused us of doing something we didn't do. You said Hillary Clinton didn't say whatever she didn't say. I'm saying to you, listen.
And she said it's sitting here, and you were fine with her saying it was illegitimate for Republicans to win.
She called Donald Trump the next morning, and she conceded the election, Ted.
Okay, took the call.
As did Stacey Abrams.
All right.
She sat there while Donald Trump was getting sworn in.
Hillary Clinton says Trump is an illegitimate president. Hillary Clinton says the election is stolen from you. Hillary Clinton in 2002, George W. Bush was selected, not elected. Joe Biden, Al Gore was elected president. So Joe Biden claims George W. Bush was illegitimate.
Right? Or is it just you that gets to scream?
Okay, no, I agree.
Okay, then lower your voice, because we are very close to each other.
So what did you make of this clip here?
I love that he brought the heat, because while, again, I think he's carried water for Trump and he definitely was part of the whole conspiracy that Trump tried to push this election was stolen, he's not one bit wrong that this actually started with the left. They started doing this especially in 2018 with Stacey Abrams and 2016 with Donald Trump versus Hillary. We saw this all over the place on the left, and then when the right gives it back, they now want to act like this is this massive day in history where all of a sudden democracy was under threat. It's like, no, you've been undermining elections for years. Let's be really clear. And you've never gone back and recanted. Your candidates have never come up and cleared that out. They try to say like, oh, well, at least Hillary and Stacey called and, gave their congratulations and admitted that they'd lost. It's like, okay, but they still peddled that conspiracy to their voters and to the general public for years afterwards. And they continue to do it now. They continue to try to push the narrative that Russia helped steal the election for Trump. You have Hillary Clinton out here just recently saying some of these things. And I thought it was interesting. They say, when he pushes back on them and he says, Hillary continued to push that this was an illegitimate election, they say, for her it was. Which is like the equivalent of saying, well, that's her truth, right?
Well, for Donald Trump, his truth was that it was illegitimate. Now, he's wrong. But, that's such stupid logic.
Yes, it's very stupid logic. And I like how once he really kept coming with the receipts, they immediately go to shut it down. Like, they immediately start being like, you're speaking too loudly. Like, you're too close right now. Like, I don't want you to yell. We have to go to commercial. And it's like, okay, so you don't actually want to have a legitimate conversation about this topic. Like, you shouldn't have brought it up then.
They really got exposed. And I love when when she was like, well, we don't storm the Capitol. And he pointed out, well, okay, but 2020 was full of leftist riots where they literally burned cities. And I think 17 people died at the last count. And Whoopi Goldberg's like, I don't know what an Antifa riot is. And it's like, yes, Whoopi, because they don't happen in your multimillionaire gated mansion neighborhood, I'm sure. Like, they are so out of touch. They're these super rich liberal celebrities. I'm sure that they're not aware of all these riots that did the most property damage on record in decades, right? Like, because it wasn't in their neighborhoods and their media barely covered it, but that doesn't make it any less real.
That's what I was going to say, is their media didn't cover it. And Whoopi is one of the oldest people on the left's media team. So, like, Whoopi, if you don't know what this is and you're not telling your audience what this is, that's your fault. That was your job to report on those things as much as you report on January 6th. And it's really freaking telling that you don't, right? It's really telling that you want to ignore all of these things that happen in your own backyard by people on your team. And then you want to scrutinize when it happens on the right. And to me, the whole thing is just so exhausting. This is why it is so excellent being outside of the two-party system and just being able to actually be objective and informed and think for yourself and not just have this like blind bias to your side, where you're able to live in this bubble where you convince yourself that the other side is just this huge threat and all evil and so bad, and your team is so good and always does the right thing. And you sound ridiculous. Americans have got to get sick of this at some point, having even members of the media being this pigeonholed into their little bubbles. It's so stupid, and it makes everybody dumber for watching at the end of the day.
Yeah, I thought it was really revealing, but I am glad they did it. They actually had someone different on. I don't know if they'll be doing it again anytime soon after getting kind of exposed, to be honest with you. But it makes for really good TV and interesting content to discuss on the podcast. So thank you to The View and Ted Cruz for the clickbait content. Hopefully, though, I would love to see them have somebody on who is not in thrall to kind of like partisan Team Red, because you get stuck in the trap of having to defend Trump, where it's like, no, like, I wish we could just, if I was on and they were trying to talk about all this stuff about Trump, I'd say, yeah, that sucks. Now let's talk about you, right? Like, and I wouldn't have to get caught up in defending all that. That's the unfortunate thing when they have a Republican partisan on. But hey, I'm all about dialogue. It's better than nothing. Let us know what you guys think in the comments if you're watching us on YouTube. But that was quite the television segment. So, Hannah, is Joe Biden about to delete our TikTok accounts?
So there are a lot of people speculating that the U.S. government might be trying to ban TikTok, and this is actually not a new story. This initially started all the way back in June when the FCC commissioner, who is a Republican, initially came out and he called on Google and Apple to ban TikTok, which the FCC cannot just unilaterally do because they don't have oversight in that way. But he was basically saying that TikTok is stealing the data of U.S. consumers who use it. And this has been backed up. Their parent company, ByteDance, has repeatedly accessed private information on U.S. users, even though the company tried to say that they were not doing that. China has tried to push back and say that, they limit it. There's only certain people within their government that have access. But either way, it's pretty fishy, and there's a lot of people who are becoming concerned that this could be a national security risk. And that's because they think it could be used as a surveillance tool. They also think it could be used as a propaganda tool if there's any kind of escalation in our conflict with China. People have also pointed out that it could be used to stoke discord and dissent among the Western youth, which I think you and I have both witnessed on the app. They certainly promote communism over capitalism. They certainly try to downplay the quality of life in Western countries. So all of that I think is fair, but that had kind of dissipated for a little bit until earlier this week, when the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland came out and said that he was going to announce, a ban on TikTok because he kind of teased this press conference and said that he'd give details of a quote, quote, significant national security case. Everybody assumed that that meant TikTok. Ultimately, he came out and clarified that it had nothing to do with TikTok. It had to do with them charging 2 Chinese nationalists that were trying to obstruct justice in another investigation. But that still led to people kind of speculating online that something could be coming down the road. You had people all over that were saying they were hearing chatter that the US would ban TikTok. And so that's where this kicked off. You and I started talking about it because I think this is interesting. And while I don't think it's imminent at this point, I don't really think it's a conversation that's going away. It seems to be something that's on the table. And it's kind of an interesting overlap because a lot of people are very concerned about China and our conflict with them. There's a lot of people, I think, who are pushing for further conflict with China. And then you also have sort of the general issues with big tech that overlap with this, right? Where you have both the left and right very concerned with how information is being distributed on social media channels, what information is allowed to be out there, how it can be used to sway political outcomes. And, we started Base Politics in large part because we believe in the power of social media to affect change, especially in the political sector, but in many areas of culture as well. And I think that we feel very passionately about going to where the battlefield is and winning in the marketplace of ideas. And we've been able to do that, but we do it while also acknowledging there are hurdles. And I think especially when it comes to TikTok, I've had a lot of people question me about my use of it since it is owned by a communist government. So what are your takes on this? Do you think we should ban TikTok? And if so, why?
Yeah, there's a lot of support on the right for banning or heavily restricting TikTok. Remember, Trump actually briefly considered doing it, and then they were trying to make TikTok sell to a US company for portions of it, but it ended up getting unwinded with some assurances they received. But there's also been all this reporting, and I'm not sure how true it honestly is. I can't say I'm an expert in this, but there's been reporting suggesting that TikTok had planned to track the location of specific American individuals of interest to its parent company, which, as you note, is ultimately controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. There's also been reporting that TikTok can access data from other apps and possibly even access your camera or microphone when you're not using the app. All of this is reporting. The company denies a lot of this. I can't really sit here and litigate what's true and what's false, but it's often called Chinese spyware, which I think is perhaps hyperbolic, but gets at a real concern. Now, should it be banned, though? I lean towards no. Even for free marketeers, national security can be a viable justification on some trade restrictions, but that seems like a really broad measure. I think people should be made fully aware of all the risks. And the truth that we have to grapple with is that a lot of Americans don't care. A lot of them, if you explain to them exactly how much their privacy is being compromised by using TikTok, will say, okay, and shrug, especially Gen Zers. They really have just very minimal expectations of privacy. And we might not like that, but that should, I think, mostly be their choice. One thing that I would think does make sense would be prohibiting, federal government employees, state government employees, anyone with security clearances from using the app because it could be used to spy on or obtain information that could be used to blackmail people in our government. I think that would make a lot of sense. I think if companies want to have a policy, like say that you're at a Fortune 500 company and you don't want your executives using TikTok, fine. I don't think we should be stepping in and banning it. I'm also not sure that we could. Gen Z happens to be much more tech savvy than Congress or Joe Biden. And I think that a lot of them would laugh, say, okay, boomer, and then set their VPN to Mexico and be right back on TikTok. So I think the question of a ban, I don't know, maybe they could find a way to do it, but banning entire apps, blocking platforms that tens of millions of young people are now really, it's their top app. They get news. It's become the second biggest search engine after Google, I believe, TikTok itself. So I think a ban is not warranted, probably too heavy-handed, but I think there are real concerns. I think they're valid, and I think there's a variety of restrictions and measures we could take to hopefully address them.
Well, I definitely think you're right that Americans don't care about privacy. Like, we saw Edward Snowden sacrifice his life to let them know their own government was spying on them, and people mostly went, nah, or thought he was an enemy even, which is still just the most bonkers take I've ever seen in my life. That being said, I'm somebody who does care about privacy, but I think oftentimes when we're talking about social media apps, it gets a little bit overblown. Like, I don't care if a social media app is listening to things I say as much as I do if the US government is listening to things I say, right? Because mostly what they're using it for is to sell me stuff I want. and to make me have a better
But
experience
what if
on my
that app that's listening is also a government?
But I think I just fail to see how it really... If it's the U.S. government that has the power to put me in jail or take away my liberties, yes. But how does China... I think the bigger concern actually from my standpoint would be that I do think it is a propaganda tool, and they very much do favor in the algorithm schools of thought that are not ours, right? You see a ton of out and out Marxist content on this app, and I think that can be a very powerful persuasion tool. We have a lot of young people that are on TikTok. They're getting their news there, but they're also learning their opinions there. They're seeing the world there. They're hearing about other people's cultural experience. They're I don't think it's an accident that when I get on TikTok, oftentimes I'm flooded with people who have left the U.S. and are so much happier, left the U.S. and are thriving, left the U.S. and have much better socialized care in other countries, right? I don't think it's an accident that when I go on there and I'm looking at real estate, I'm presented with the whole anti-landlord, kill your landlord kind of content that you see on there, right? That's intentional. And you and I both had to overcome some of those algorithm barriers to get the policies that we talk about out there. I don't think it's an accident that when I go on there and talk about the fact that we funded the Wuhan lab and ask questions about COVID, that I get censored, right? All of these things are, I think, a problem, but I think to me that says we have to go fight. And I think you're right. If they tried to ban it, not only would people find a way around it, but something else would crop up. And I don't think there's any reason to think that those things like Instagram are necessarily more favorable to our views either. That is just the sort of inertia of where we're at right now.
But they're not as bad on the privacy front, though. Like Instagram or YouTube, they're American companies. They're not owned by the Communist Party.
They are just as bad. They sell our data to our government. They're just as bad.
I don't think they are.
It is the exact same thing. And again, I just don't think that matters as much, right? I like the fact that I am sold things I want to be sold in my ads. I like the fact that when I get on Instagram or TikTok, there's content that I actually want to see. There's an extent to where the privacy and the data questions are, about consumers and actually getting you a better product. And I do think that things like the Apple iPhone are doing a lot to let you customize that as well. You can now say when you open an app, if you want it to track you, if you want it to share your data with other apps, you have a little bit more power over that, and I think that will only increase as we progress. I do agree that it being a communist-owned government behind TikTok does make it different than other social media platforms, but I don't think I'm anywhere near worried enough about it to think the U.S. government should be banning it, nor do I think they could. So I think it's kind of a silly conversation, and I think what we should be trying to do is find ways to de-escalate our issues with China and not be getting into things like trade wars with them, which I think we're really foolish to enter in the first place under Trump. I think there are better ways that we can look to try to spread democracy and spread our views, but I don't want to see us get into an actual conflict with China. I don't think that anybody should be gunning for that. And unfortunately, I feel like that's where a lot of this kind of backlash on the right comes from, is there are people who I think want us to get into eventually an actual conflict with this country.
Well, I think we are in a conflict with them, not a war, but like a geopolitical and economic war for top dominance. And I think China's a real aggressor towards us and does a lot of very aggressive and bad stuff towards the U.S. And I think, for example, like one real threat from TikTok is the reason that TikTok is a lot more popular than Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts is because it's better. Its algorithm is amazing. It knows so much about you and is so good at customizing your content that it shows you, but that can be weaponized. There's a pretty disturbing history of China blackmailing government officials to force them to spy for them. And so let me give you an example. In a Republican administration, I knew many of such folks in the Trump administration. You have somebody working in a national security position who is gay but not out because he comes from a very Christian family. Yet TikTok knows he's gay and knows that for a long time. CCP accesses that information and blackmails him. Says, we'll expose you to your family, who said they would disown you unless you leak us these government files, right? Like that kind of thing is not a far-fetched scenario because China has literally done this many times. And there are ways it could undermine U.S. national security, U.S. trade secrets, lots of things. So I'm sympathetic. But like I said, I think there's lots of things we could do far short of a ban that might actually make a difference on that. Yeah, it's a messy issue for me. But I don't think that we should or probably are capable of banning it. So I agree with you. It is kind of a little bit of a debate over theory, But it's also an interesting, because I've become more of a China hawk. You know, I used to believe, I'm certainly not like a full China hawk, but I've definitely become, I used to believe, what I still mostly believe, but Milton Friedman, others have famously talked about free trade as a liberalizing force. When goods cross borders, soldiers won't. Right? This idea that when you trade with another country, you'll become more interconnected, they will become freer. As they grow richer, they'll become more democratic. They'll be less likely to have conflict. Unfortunately, as China has liberalized, as they opened up their markets and got a lot richer, they became more authoritarian, not less. They became more hostile to the U.S. And they're still the exception. It's still occurred in the opposite direction in a lot of other places, but it has challenged some of my beliefs. And then, you know, the things they do to our intellectual property, I agree trade war with them is bad, but they've been waging a trade war on us, regardless. Now, tariffs in response are still self-defeating. But they're like, I've just become more concerned about China. I think I was definitely somebody who 3 or 4 years ago really wasn't that fazed by it. Now I do think it's a legitimate concern, but not necessarily one that requires banning TikTok.
Yeah, I think your points are fair, and I think that we need to be engaging this conversation because so often, you know, one problem with libertarian theory is we're kind of just like hands off. And I think there are enough people who are concerned about China, and I get it. It's a brutal, disgusting, inhumane regime. They literally disappear people. They persecute pastors. Communism is the most deadly ideology of all time. And I think that we have to think more deeply about solutions. But that being said, you know, when we talk about the trade war, it's like predominantly what they were doing was underselling U.S. companies. And I do understand some of the issues with that. There's also benefits to that. There's a lot of much cheaper products that we have because of that have benefited especially poorer Americans. And I don't think we want to keep escalating this by continuing to escalate that trade war or by taking motions like banning TikTok. I think, again, we need to find more diplomatic means to move forward. But also the reality is that until the people of China rise up and fight back against their own government, you're never going to see long-term change. I think that's actually kind of the problem in Russia that we're seeing right now, right? Like, you overthrew the Soviet regime there, but it's still really in power for the most part because the people themselves never rose up and actually fought back and actually fought to liberate their country. And so long term, I don't think U.S. involvement in these conflicts actually is a solution either. But we'll have to move on from that for another time. It's a very interesting discussion. And the good news is, I think that if they were to ban TikTok, it is already so dominated, the social media platform has already so changed that whole market that every other company is really integrated the same kind of capacities and will only probably continue to. I think other things will pop up. So either way, we will still be using short form video to get our ideas out there. And I guess it matters less. But I personally like TikTok because my algorithm is lit. Okay, I'll tell you what is not lit though, and that is a recent report card on the nation's schools that just came out. The New York Times ran a headline this week that said, math scores fell in nearly every state and reading dipped on national exams. If you dig further into the article, they say that U.S. students in most states and across almost all demographic groups have experienced troubling setbacks in both math and reading, according to an authoritative national exam released on Monday. That they say it offered the most definitive indictment yet of the pandemic's impact on millions of school children, which is
the pandemic.
Yeah, we'll get back to that in a minute. They found that declines in math were the steepest recorded in history. We were already not doing that great before the pandemic, just so you know. They also found that only 1 in 3 students currently meets proficiency standards, which basically means that students are on track for their grade level and positioned to keep succeeding and keep moving up. And then predictably, the research found that these declines were especially pronounced among demographics that were already, quote, quote, vulnerable. While they didn't spell this out, I can only assume that means children who belong to certain minority groups and or lower socioeconomic classes. Now, you might be saying, how bad is all this exactly? I'm going to let our friend Corey DeAngelis, who's an amazing school choice advocate, explain this is him the other night on NBC News. Let's roll this clip.
Country's education system. I want to bring in senior fellow at the American Federation for Children, Corey DeAngelis. Corey, put this into perspective. How monumental of a problem is this?
I mean, these are drastic drops. These are the biggest declines that we've seen in mathematics in about 3 decades since they first started the assessment back in 1990. And we also found that states that had schools closed longer had bigger drops in mathematics scores. We've seen 3 different independent evaluations finding the same relationship. More school closures, more learning loss at the same time. And Catholic schools, which were open much more than the public schools, they saw smaller academic losses than the traditional public schools.
I want to get to that.
All right, Brad, so what's your take on all of this?
So first off, kudos to Corey getting on NBC News at night. I love to see him taking the message to the mainstream like that. I'm just imagining millions of normie PBS style viewers watching this and being like, what's this school choice thing this young whippersnapper is talking about? No, but he's absolutely right. I think this is disastrous. We've also seen the ACT, the big pre-college admissions test, has the lowest scores in 30 years, and that very closely predicts college success. And stuff like this is complicated, but the number one cause here for me has to be school closures during COVID. Not the pandemic, but our response, our policies that our governors and our localities and our largely and oftentimes at the behest of teachers' unions chose to force students into virtual learning that they were not prepared for. Tons of students just totally disappeared, never logged on once. It was an absolute disaster. It failed miserably. You heard it from so many parents who were radicalized by these school closures because kids were never at any serious risk from COVID-19 of dying. Statistically, unless they had a serious comorbidity like a pre-existing condition, the death risk was statistically indistinguishable from 0, according to the Wall Street Journal. So it was basically a sacrifice that didn't even work to try to help and protect old people or people who were vulnerable at the expense of kids in the future. And now this is going to create a lifetime earnings gap, a lifetime success gap between this crop of kids and everybody else. And I think it's disgraceful. I think it's an injustice. I think it's really wrong. And I also think that in the 2022 midterm elections, many of these Democratic governors who kept their schools closed far after we knew it was a bad idea, they're going to be held to account for it. I think parents are mad.
If only somebody, and by somebody I mean literally the entire center-right demographic in the U.S. could have predicted this 2 years ago. Oh wait, we did. All of the gains we had made, and we had made significant gains in child poverty and child hunger, wiped out. We saw skyrocketing mental health issues. We saw shocking increases in domestic abuse. That is all on top of the actual academic loss that we've seen here. It is one of the largest injustices I have ever seen carried out in my lifetime. And let's not forget that when parents protested this in the midst of it happening and said we need our schools to be open, that they were investigated as domestic terrorists by the Department of Justice and by the FBI. That's just one thing I'll never get over that happened in all this. And also I want to point out, when Rand Paul predicted all this would happen and specifically said this will hurt kids for generations and it will especially hurt kids on the margins, that he had his life threatened on Twitter. People were asking for his neighbor to come back out and beat him up.
It's terrible.
These people are criminals. Like, it is disgusting. And now you have Randy Weingarten, the head of the teachers union, trying to run around and act like they were not complicit in this, that they didn't work to shut down schools. You have Fauci trying to say he never helped to shut down schools. They're all running away from this. They're all running away because the chickens have come home to roost. We've been right about every single freaking thing in this pandemic and the responses to it, and they have to answer. I'm so tired of it. They're not going to gaslight their way out of this. They are responsible. They are complicit, and I think it's disgusting. And I hope these kids come for them when they're adults and turn against the left and progressivism and unions and government schools and all of the people that did this to them, because it is foul.
Well, and Corey makes a good point in that interview about how private schools, especially Catholic schools, have fared much better. And that's because they were much less likely to close, and when they did closed for far less long. And to me, I understand. I give a lot of people some even Republican governors who close stuff right at the height of 2020 in the spring, like March April 2020. I get it. We didn't know everything. People panicked. I can make some allowances for bad decisions that were made in the kind of fog of an emergency. But there were places a year later still closing schools, or hybrid model, or yes, schools are open, but if your kid is in the same class as somebody who has COVID, you're all virtual for 3 weeks. And to me, I fail to see why any school really should have ever closed for a day at all. We asked freaking gas station attendants and grocery store clerks to go to work throughout the entire pandemic because they were essential workers. Well, educators are essential workers too. Schools are essential for both education and the future generations, and for childcare, for our economy, frankly. And so I thought from the beginning that any individual teacher, because the kids were never at almost any risk, if we're being honest, but the teachers, some of them might have been at risk, should have been allowed to stay home if they were truly, had a pre-existing condition, or they were 65 or something where they would be at serious risk. Maybe some sort of paid leave for them, hire some younger substitutes who aren't at much risk from COVID, and keep the schools open the entire time, frankly. I really don't understand any of it, why it ever had to close, and now we're living with some serious costs from all these bad decisions.
And I want to point out that I don't really buy the notion that all these teachers were so afraid of going to work. No, the unions kept schools closed for a political agenda. They basically tried to hold the schools hostage, especially in places like California, where they were like, we won't come back unless you give us universal health care. We won't come back unless it was like a whole left-wing agenda item that had nothing to do with safety whatsoever. And now they're going to try to say that they need more money. I guarantee it's what they always do when they're failing everybody. They try to come out and say they need more money. I want to play this other clip from Corey real fast where he will nip that in the bud. Let's roll this one.
Corey, good to see you. I think though the better than $100 billion spent during COVID, presumably a lot of it earmarked, that's always an awful word, for schools and all of that, but a lot of it unspent, right?
Yeah, if you look at the latest data reported at the Wall Street Journal from earlier this summer, 93% of the funding from the American Rescue Plan dedicated to K-12 education hasn't even been spent yet. That's over $100 billion.
How did that happen?
They're sitting on the money. They have so much money that they don't know what to do with it. And in places like Los Angeles, the latest data that I've seen reported, they were planning on increasing the number of teachers in the system by about 8%, the number of custodial workers in the system by about 25%, and the number of psychological/support social workers by about 80%, while they've lost like 6% of their school-age population in Los Angeles public schools. In far too many places, the public education system has become a jobs program for adults as opposed to an education initiative for kids. And that means less money to spend on improving academic outcomes for kids. And I think the one way to fix this is school choice, allow for more competition so that the districts have an incentive to spend that money in the classroom on kids' academic outcomes.
So, Brad, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but I love his point that the education system has become more of a jobs program than it is an education program, right? This mostly exists. We're spending, on average, $15,000 per year per kid, which is almost double the average rate of private tuition in this country, and for much worse results. We know that teachers are being asked to buy their own supplies for the classroom, that they're paid crap for the work that they do. Obviously, the money is getting wasted and abused and used. There's all kinds of fraud. They're paying all their administrators like fat cats. I recently learned of this whole scam outside of the government schools where basically people get paid to headhunt for teachers and get a huge chunk of the salary that's being spent on the teachers versus the teacher getting it. Yeah, the list goes on and on. But when they say they need more money for kids, I think this should be the line from now on. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I agree. And I'm so glad Corey pointed it out. The American Rescue Plan, the Biden Democrat stimulus law that they signed into law, gave hundreds of billions of dollars to public schools in a massive bailout. They said it was so schools can safely reopen, but two things. There was no requirement that schools actually reopen in order to get the money. And two, most of the money, it was over a decade, and most of the money was in more than 2 years, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10. after the pandemic we all knew would be long over. So it was really, I think the unions exert so much political power. And when I blame the unions for stuff, I'm not blaming, your kid's math teacher, even if they're a member of this unions. People have to understand that, like, teachers' unions exist as separate entities with political influence, with officials who run them, with their own interest groups that aren't representative of most actual teachers. So we're not attacking teachers when we attack the unions, but the unions are so powerful in the sway they hold over the Democratic Party that they essentially closed schools, then held it hostage to get these hundreds of billions of dollars in fat cash that they now get to do whatever they want with, courtesy of the taxpayer, and there's no accountability. So much of it's going to be wasted. I think the entire thing is a hot mess, and it's not a coincidence that we're seeing massive school choice initiatives in states like Arizona become law because people want to opt out of what is increasingly a broken system.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, I don't know about you, my blood pressure has had enough of this segment. I want to move on. It makes me so angry. I get so mad. But we have our internet roundup, our quick hits from the internet this week. I see you have a pretty spicy one to kick us off with, so I'll let you intro it.
Yeah, so in case you guys didn't know, Republicans are Hitler, and if you care about inflation, you are actually a Hitler enabler, just like people in pre-Nazi era Germany. Take a listen to this clip from MSNBC, where somebody by the name of Matthew Dowd went on a little rant. Take a listen.
Right? I mean, it's not even being hidden. At this point, it's just fascism in the open. And what scares me is that I'm not sure everybody minds. I think there are some people who will just sit back and let it happen, thinking it won't be that bad. And that, to me, is almost more dangerous than the radicals.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that, the GOP are Nazis at this point or whatever, but it certainly sounds very familiar to what happened in Germany, which is a bunch of citizens. Adolf Hitler gets a third of the vote. Nobody thought it could happen there. They kind of went along because they said he was going to solve the economy and fix inflation.
Yeah, that's right.
You can hear those sorts of things. And then, lo and behold, a few years later, they lost their democracy, and they're all like, how'd that happen here? That's my worry. That is my worry. Obviously, the price of a hamburger, the price of milk, the price of gas is concerning. But that is a short-term problem. The loss of a democracy will decimate everyone's freedom.
So I don't know about you, but I found this absurd for a couple of reasons. One of which being anytime anyone makes a Hitler comparison, just don't. Nothing is comparable to Hitler. You just always end up making a fool of yourself. And secondly, he's like, I'm not calling Republicans Hitler, but you know who else cared about inflation? Germans in Nazi Germany. So they're literally saying, suck up and accept 10% inflation and your wages being destroyed. Or if you care about that and vote about that, then you're basically just like Nazi enablers. How do they think that this is remotely connected to reality, or that anyone's going to think that, I really feel convinced by this line of argumentation for the Dems?
Yeah, I don't know. These people are whack jobs, and I'm also convinced that Hitler is the only history they've ever learned in their entire life, because they have literally no other historic examples to go to. Anything's bad, it must be Hitler. It's there's I don't know, probably 1,000 things underneath Hitler that are less hyperbolic you could point to. But the interesting thing to me that I keep hearing them say, and I saw Max Boot say something else online that was similar today, is essentially what they're trying to say here is if Republicans can win, right? Which is essentially saying if there's two parties, if there's an option on the ballot, democracy dies, which is fundamentally the opposite of what the word democracy means.
If people vote for Republicans in a legitimate election, democracy is gonna die.
Democracy dies. What? I don't think you even know what democracy means. And then he says, I want to support the Constitution. No, you don't. No, you don't. The left has not had anything to do with the Constitution for about my entire lifetime, at least. Probably further back than that. That's just, you're not selling anybody. You're not convincing anybody. You are just making yourself look like a Looney Tune. And I'm so tired of people conflating 6 million people being murdered, mass genocide, with people who believe in a different economic theory than they do. Stop. You're disgusting.
It's like anti-Semitic, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think lightly throwing around the Holocaust serves to essentially like take away the true horror of it, right? And so I think it might not be intentional, but that's anti-Jew, anti-Semitic. It's an insult to Holocaust survivors and their descendants to go around and say, well, if you care about the price of a hamburger and inflation, you're basically a Nazi sympathizer. That's just, it's so absurd. And it also reminds me, like, what a echo chamber these partisan media networks. Like, this is Joy Reid, one of the most extreme hosts. She has 2 guests who completely agree with her and are in sync with the progressive establishment. I would love, like, in an actual normal news show, if somebody said something like that, there'd be someone on the panel to point out how absurd that is. But when all you have is an echo chamber, you end up making an ass of yourself on television and just be clowning yourself, and there's no check. There's no force to balance it out. And that's why nobody watches these hyper-partisan networks like this anymore. Their numbers are abysmal, and this kind of content is why.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the last thing I want to add is this kind of language actually does harm democracy because it convinces everybody that anybody who disagrees with you is a homicidal maniac who must be stopped, right? It prevents people from actually being able to come together and work on things, to understand that there are other people they have to live with in society, have different views than them, and finding cohesive ways to get along. This is actually dangerous and damaging to our culture, to our civil discourse, and ultimately that is the kind of thing that if you keep escalating and then the other side retaliates, then you keep going, you do actually get into wars, you do actually get into conflicts, you do see breakdowns of countries. So I think that this is not only completely unhinged, but it actually is just a very dangerous line of thinking. And I'm so sad that there's anybody in these audiences. I'm glad they're dwindling, but good grief. Get out of your echo chamber, go touch grass. This sounds like, honestly, it should be late night fodder. That's how ridiculous they sound. It should be something where they're just getting lambasted by late night comics. But guess what? Those shows are also dying. They're firing all their hosts. They can't get viewers anymore either because they also become liberal echo chambers. All right, well, what do we have up next?
So this one, Hannah, you haven't seen this yet, but I'm going to play this TikTok for you, and then we are going to discuss, this is like this viral TikTok about this young woman complaining about a job interview, and it's like a very interesting generational divide. On one hand, old people are saying she's entitled and ridiculous, and most Gen Zers are being like, wow, yes, this employer sounds absurd, good for you. You take a listen, and then we will discuss on the other side of this.
I've never been so disrespected in my life. What I just experienced in this job interview, like what I just went through, there is not a clearer way to tell people that you are interviewing that we don't give a about our employees. We don't care about them. So I'm putting applications out all over Indeed. I get a response from one company, Brand IQ in Miami, Florida, and they're like, oh, we liked your application. We'd like to interview you. Can you come in for this interview? I'm like, okay, that's a little inconvenient for a first interview. Maybe like a phone call, a Zoom call. You want me to drive 45 minutes all the way for a first interview? But it's okay. I'm going to go. As I'm doing some more research, I'm starting to see some red flags. First of all, not the type of company I thought they were. Second of all, their mission, vision, brand voice, values, all of those, they're not there. And lastly, I see that the position is for marketing coordinator, which is not an entry-level position, okay? This is a position that requires experience. And they want to pay $36,000 to $38,000 in Miami, Florida. I'm like shocked at this, but I think like, okay, maybe something's wrong here. I'm just gonna go anyway and just find out what they're about. I walk up to their office, which isn't even an office. It's a little room with these 2 glass fish bowls like side by side, okay? And there's like 10 people sitting in this first like little fish bowl. And I'm like walking in, hi, I'm Natalia, like I'm here for an interview. And this receptionist, she like stands up and she's like, oh, hey, I need you to fill this out. I'm like, fill what out? Like, you have my application, you have my resume. I even brought a resume with me. Literally a paper application, as if I were applying for like, I don't know, a summer job or something. At this point, I'm like, y'all, I have not slaved away in my professional career to be applying for a job like this. Like, what is going on? Then in the fishbowl right next to us, there's this man like interviewing these people right in front of us. I can hear everything they're saying. I suddenly know things about these people that I don't need to be knowing. After my interview time slot has gone and passed and I'm still sitting there, this guy comes in and he asks 2 other people to go with him. I'm still sitting there and I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, so I asked the girl, like, what is this process? Like, what is going on here? He literally looks at me and goes, this is an interview. I said, baby girl, I know it's an interview and I am not here for it. I literally said, thank you so much, but I'm actually good. And I got up and I walked out. Like, if you want to show people that you do not care about your employees, that they are dispensable to you, literally just have an interview process like that.
So Hannah, a bunch of the commenters thought that she was entitled, or like it's totally normal to have to interview in person or to have to fill out a paper application. And I mostly sympathized. I thought she was a little dramatic, but I mostly sympathized with her, actually, in this video that's really blown up on TikTok.
It's funny because you're Gen Z and I'm a millennial, and I have learned so much in a positive direction about how I want to approach work from you, because we're both very hard workers. We both work round the clock. But when I first started working next to you in various environments, I was like, oh, that's what it's like to put boundaries in place. That's what it's like to stand up for yourself. And I was just never taught to do that in the workforce. I mean, I come from boomer parents. I came from that mentality of like, just work really hard and you'll get ahead. And that's not always true. And when I graduated, I graduated into a terrible economy. It was 2010. Jobs were slim. And I also graduated into a terrible job market because I was going into the music industry, which for those who don't know is collapsing and pays like crap and treats people terribly. And I was just trying to survive, but there's so many things I look back on. I'm like, I wish I'd done this differently or that. Like just how I let people speak to me, the kind of hours that I would agree to work for no pay, even just the pay I would agree to, like not knowing my worth. And not knowing like the red flags to look for in companies when you're interviewing with them. So I feel like Gen Z's actually come a long way. And to me, I think that's a free market response when you see people saying, we're not doing this. We're not working for this. I'm not going to do this kind of job for this hours. I don't want to work for people like this. That's a great way to pressure companies and managers to change, to hire people that are better at management, to make sure they have policies in place that actually value their employees. And if they don't, they're going to lose their best employees and not attract good ones too. And I think that's an excellent repercussion for being really bad at running a business, right? And ultimately, if you keep that up, you'll go out of business if you can't get good people to work for you. So I have no problem with her. I think older generations, I think it's 2 things. They're kind of like me, where it's like, well, I had to suffer, so you should too. But I don't ever take that approach in how I look at things. But then I also think the reality is a lot of boomers benefit from you being taught that you're entitled if you ask for more, right? Like they're the people at the top at this point. They own the companies, they're the managers. And so it really works for them if you're willing to work for nothing and work long hours and get crapped on all the time. So I'm pretty sympathetic to her. I actually walked out of a job interview once. I never told you this because it's random, but before I had a full-time job, I just graduated college. I was still performing, so I was not wanting like a typical 9 to 5, but I went in and I interviewed for this sales job that somebody connected me to. And this is actually a pretty common experience I've learned over the years, that you go in and you interview and they said, okay, we want you to come back one day next week and basically shadow somebody and see how you do. Weird. But I'm like, cool, I need a better job, I need more money, like I'll do it. So you get in that day, and what they basically do is they're sending you out into the field to try to sell stuff. They're basically getting free labor out of you for a full day. So I go to like one stop with this guy I'm shadowing, I'm in his car, and he's like, yeah, we're gonna go in. I don't know what we were selling. We were selling paper or something, let's say. And he's like, yeah, we're gonna go in and do this, and this. And I was like, so I'm going on like sales meetings? I'm gonna be pitching right now? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I don't think I want this job. So I'm asking him questions about like the health benefits, and it was all terrible. And I literally called my boyfriend and I was like, come pick me up. Because I was in this guy's car, and he came and got me, and I ghosted. I left. The guy was texting me. He's like, where'd you go? And I was like, sorry, I don't want this job. Bye. Like, out.
That's awesome. No, I mean, good for you. I think the one thing this girl in this video did is she played herself. Like, why did you go when the salary was $36,000? Like, that is not a workable wage in living in a city, especially for somebody, it seems like she has a degree in marketing or whatever. So why'd you do it? Why'd you even show up? That'd be my one criticism of her. It does sound shady. I think you made such a good point a minute ago when you brought up what kind of economy are you graduating into? Because if you graduated like into a recession where there was a high unemployment rate, so there's lots of job seekers and few jobs, then you are kind of like in the situation as a job seeker. Take whatever they give to you, right? Take the scraps, let them treat you like crap. But our current situation is the opposite. We have a labor shortage. We have more jobs than we have people willing to fill them. So the workers have the leverage right now. And that means that employers have to attract them, not just throw them scraps and expect them to come begging. I think, I think she's got a little bit of Valley Girl to her. And she's like, literally, and very dramatic. But in general, I don't get why all these people were mad about this. Like, good for her for walking out if it's not the job she wants and not letting them kind of treat her like a entry-level, one of many, you're lucky to even be here. She said, no, thank you. Bye-bye. And I'm like, I love that energy.
Yeah, I'm all here for it. All right, I think that's all the time we have for this week's Very Online segment. We still need a name for that, guys. If you have ideas, put them in the comments. We'd love your ideas for what we should title this section because we think it's really fun, but we haven't come up with anything yet. But on to hot takes. I have a very sexist hot take this week, and I'm not sorry about it. I firmly believe that women are so much better at planning events than men. I've had to suffer through so many events that only a man has planned. And when I tell you the attention to detail is not there, I just haven't seen it. Maybe there's an amazing man event coordinator out there. They're probably gay, a gay man.
I was about to say,
exist.
The exception, there are some gays who are like wedding planners or whatever,
yes,
who would give any woman a run for their money. But generally speaking, I think you may have a point.
I'm talking straight males. Let me clarify. But we had one experience, Brad, I'm not going to say where, but you and I had to do an event a while back where the planner was a man, and they said that we were going somewhere luxurious. And when they said that, I was like, I feel very certain my definition of luxurious is not the same as his. And I was very right, and I was very right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I did another event recently where like they like don't remember things like you have a food allergy or like think of ways to label it, and when a woman does it, it's all like very organized and laid out. So I'm just gonna say I prefer to go to events that were planned by a woman.
Okay. Still processing that. Okay, my hot take is that journalists need to stop using their work as a substitute for therapy. And what is prompting this is a hell of a take that I saw. So I've been watching the new Game of Thrones series, and it's like a spinoff. Have you watched Game of Thrones? Are you into this at all?
Well, yeah, I saw the original. I didn't even know there was a spinoff.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a new spinoff. It's actually quite good. You should watch it. But in it features a incestuous relationship between two of the main characters.
Yeah.
So Cosmopolitan, this magazine, right? They published an article that says, now that House of Dragon, which is the spinoff, is over, I'll say it, incest fantasies are hot. And then the author rationalizes why it's okay to be into incest as a like fetish category, even if you wouldn't really do it in life. And I'm like, this sounds like something you should be talking to a counselor about, not writing in a widely known magazine about. Like, you're just projecting your internal demons here onto all of our news feeds, and I don't appreciate it. And I actually think it's an increasingly common practice in the mainstream media where these woke journalists project their neurosis onto the rest of us and come out with these bizarre takes that seem to be internal rationalizations manifested into political commentary.
It's just like you're taking the clickbait really far at this point. Like, I get it, you gotta pay the bills, but like, good grief. No, this is some deep Alabama shit. I'm not here for it. Like, and I'm from Alabama. Like, no ma'am. We're not going there. All right. Well, that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave us a comment, and we'll see you next week. Until then, stay based.